welcome to the Art of Being Human. Today I'm going to set up a scenario for you, and my purpose in doing that is to help you to understand where your anxiety and where your depression could have started to begin with. Now we have to remember that sometimes depression and anxiety is caused by something being wrong with you physically. The brain chemistry is not in balance, or you have too much thyroxine or not enough thyroxine, or other kinds of hormones in your bloodstream. There can be all kinds of physical reasons why you suffer depression and anxiety. But above and beyond that, there are all kinds of emotional reasons why you do too. So I've decided to kind of set up a scenario. I'm going to talk about the kind of person that may have raised you, or the kind of people that you have dealt with that could have caused you to feel anxious. What kind of people were they? What were their characteristics? And then go on to what would your responses have been, and what kind of fears would you got as a result of that? So it's just kind of it's kind of a conceptual thing, I think, just hopefully done so that you can maybe pinpoint where your depression or anxiety came from to begin with. But what was the attitude and the behavior of people that you dealt with that caused you to react by having emotions, bad emotions, fears, anxiety to begin with? So I'm going to start off with this. This is something that parents could have done to their children, bosses could have done to their employees, and this kind of thing. So this person who acted in such a way to cause you anxiety, what did they do? What were they like? So remember, this is just a conceptualization. Not all of it would be true. Some of it may be true. You may have had other circumstances that I don't even list, but I kind of want to go through that as a mental exercise for you to help you to pinpoint some things. So the person that you dealt with could have been parent, could have been coach, could have been teacher, could have been a boss, could have been anybody, but you reacted to it by having anxiety. They could have acted like they were always perfect and always right. You know, we do deal with people who always feel that they're right. Nothing that they do is wrong. And you can't fight against it. That's a part of their personality. So they could have acted like they were always right. They could have acted like they had no faults, that they were always on top of things. They always knew what was going on. They could have acted like they always wanted control. You didn't have any choices. They had control. It's their way or the highway, their way or no way. Some people are like that. They could have gotten control by making you feel guilty. Anything that went wrong was your fault. You were the guilty one. They were the right one. It's very hard to deal with a person who has that kind of narcissism, but a lot of people do have that kind of narcissism. So they could have made you feel guilty. They could have given you double messages. Now, double messages means, and this would have been with children, basically, their parents. They act like one way, and then they act like another way, and then you can't reconcile the two. Oh, I love you, you're wonderful. Why can't you do anything right? Have you ever heard parents say that? You're wonderful and I love you and you're just the best child. I can't stand it when you do that wrong. I've told you 15 times not to do that. Why are you doing that still? You know, they act like they love you, but they don't. They respect you, but they don't. They honor you, but they don't. It's a double message. I think you're terrific. Why can't you do anything right? Is like saying, you can't do anything right. You certainly aren't perfect. And yet at the same time, I'm saying that you're perfect. These two double messages are irreconcilable. I love you, but I don't. Why would a child feel they weren't loved? Well, if their parents are always angry at them. They can't say, oh, it's just a mistake, let's try it again. You were bad, you did it wrong. So how can they love you if you're bad and you did it wrong? You know, children get these double messages from their parents all the time, and I think it's one of the reasons why children grow up very anxious. Well, yes, you can do it. You're capable of doing it, and then you don't do it. You don't get all A's, and then the parents are angry at you because you didn't get all A's. What's wrong with you? Something's wrong with you. You can't do it. And yet at the same time, they're telling you you can do it. So it's a double message. They're opposite. The messages are opposite. I love you, but I don't. You're perfect, but you're not. You can do it, but you can't. You know, those things are not reconcilable. I either can't do it or I can do it. To say I can do it and then tell me that I can't do it, well, then that's not the same. And I can't reconcile the two. It either is or it isn't. And so children sometimes are raised that way. Parents raise their children that way, and they grow up very, very insecure because they don't know which is the right one. I love you, yes. Well, no, I'm mad at you. Well, if I'm mad at you, how can I love you? You know, children have minds and they think in a reasonable way. But when they can't put things together because it doesn't make sense to them, and it wouldn't even make sense to an adult when you stop to think of it, then they're going to be very anxious. And that's where sometimes the anxiety gets started or the depression gets started. It gets started when they are given double messages and they can't reconcile those two messages. If you are a parent, you need to watch how you talk to your children, because you may be doing the same thing without even thinking about it. You're smart, you can get A's. Well, no, you're not getting A's, so the inference is, well, maybe you're not smart. You can't get A's. You're not doing it right. You know, there's something wrong with me. I can't do what my parents say I can do. And then when it comes to divorces and a family split up, it's very difficult because the child is going to always think it's their fault. Why would a child always think that a family split up is their fault? They all do. Everyone takes the guilt on themselves. It's like they're little sponges waiting for the guilt to come. Well, the reason is if their parents are so big and so strong and they can do so many things, then their parents are pretty much perfect. Yeah, but I'm not perfect. I can't do those things. I'm not big. I'm not strong. I have to be taken care of. They have to cook my meals for me. They have to take me to my practices. They have to drive me. I can't drive. I'm not old enough. So what happens is that if they're so big and strong and they can do everything, they must be pretty much perfect. Well, then I must have been a reason, being imperfect, that the marriage broke up. It must be my fault. It must be my fault. The things are the way they are, you know? And so therefore, you get an imbalance. Now, children who grow up in families in which the expectations for their behavior are high, and then they feel like they're failures because things go wrong in the marriage, they accept the guilt. It must be my fault. I did something wrong. I had to. What was it? If you ask them what they did wrong, they don't know. It's because they didn't do anything wrong. Or they'll make up something. Well, you know, I cheated on my last test, or I didn't behave perfectly all the time. What child behaves perfectly all the time? You know, I've had to talk to children, I've counseled children in which I've needed to reassure them. You're not perfect and it's okay. You don't have to be perfect to be a wonderful child. You don't have to be perfect to be a wonderful adult. No one's perfect. And if they were perfect, then the world would be a different place. But it isn't a different place. It is what it is. It's not your fault that your parents split up. It's not your fault. You didn't do it. You didn't do anything wrong. It's between them. Children cannot understand or take responsibility for adult decisions. They're not old enough. You have to realize that the brain is not even matured and doesn't even mature until a child, young adult, is about 25 25 years old. The brain is not mature until at least 25 years old. It's mid-20s before the frontal lobe, which does the thinking, is mature. Those cells do not mature earlier. A child is not a little adult. Their brains don't function like adults. Their brains function like children at the age and stage of the development that they're at. And you don't expect a child to be able to understand adult decisions. They're not old enough. The brain isn't old enough. The brain is not developed enough to be able to do it. Don't expect your teenager to be able to understand or take responsibility for adult decisions. Their brain isn't mature enough to do it. You have to understand it's a growth process, and children grow slowly. And even though we say they grow rapidly, different areas of their brains are going to mature at different times. And the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, which makes reasonable decisions and understands reasoning, is not developed until about age 25. So giving double messages of love and hate is totally confusing to a child, gives a great deal of anxiety, and I think is even totally confusing to an adult. Supposing you go in for a job, and you have the job, and you're doing the work, and your boss says, well, I really appreciate your insights and your wisdom, and then he gets mad at you for doing something that he didn't want you to do or thought you shouldn't have done. What happens to that maturity and insights and wisdom that he praised you for maybe 20 minutes ago, and suddenly now he's angry at something? Those are mixed double messages that happens all the time, and it's something that we have to stop doing, and we have to realize when we're doing it. I think many parents don't realize that they're doing it to their children, but giving double messages of love and hate or respect and disrespect, that's going to cause a great deal of anxiety and confusion. Now, this person who caused you anxiety would probably have blamed you for everything that went wrong. They would blame you for their anger. They would blame you for their deprivation. And they're like martyrs. You were so bad, and I have to pay the price for your badness, and things like that. So you are the person who is getting the blame for everything that goes wrong, or you think you are. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But at any rate, that's what it feels like to you. Now, this person that caused you anxiety, they may have had very quick mood changes. They're happy, they're sad. They're joyous, they're not. They praise you, they don't. You know, it's mood changes, and you have to deal with the mood changes, and that's very difficult to deal with, especially in a job situation. It's very difficult also for children to deal with it if the parents have mood changes and they don't know what to do with it. You see how much you can harm a child just by not being consistent. Now, this person may have gone into rages, yelling, screaming, and nagging. It's the constant nagging that people can't stand. What is nagging? Well, it's when they're always telling you to do something over and over and over again, and they don't leave it alone. You should stop smoking. You should stop doing that. You need to take better care of yourself. You need to not stay up so late at night. And on and on and on it goes. Nagging is a killer of relationships. Nobody wants to hear it. When you say what you have to say, then drop it and leave it alone. And tell people that you're going to drop it and leave it alone. I'm telling you that I don't want you to do such and so, because you're going to have to pay a terrible consequence if you do. But I'm not going to keep telling you that. I'm not going to nag you about it. This is the way I feel, and I'm going to drop it. It's up to you to either do something about it or don't. Well, when you say something like that, then the person can make a decision. They're either going to do something about it or they're not going to do something about it. But to continually nag. That stops relationships, and it's very bad. The person that caused you anxiety may have gone into rages. They may have been very sarcastic. They may have been very demeaning in their remarks to you. Demeaning meaning they put you down. They don't say that you're a bad person exactly, but that's the inference that you get. You didn't do it right. You should have done it right. You didn't do it right. And then they nag about it or they talk about it. And as a result of that, you feel very badly. You feel like you've been crushed. You feel like you failed. And that may have been the point at which you got your anxiety. The person may have used both physical and verbal punishment. And I'm thinking mainly about children here. You did something wrong, so I'm going to give you punishment. What's the punishment? Well, it depends upon the family that you were raised in. You know, you might have had to go to your room for a half an hour. You might have had things taken away from you. You may not have been able to watch television. Maybe it was physical punishment. Maybe she hit you. Maybe she took a stick and she swatted you with it, or your mother or your father. Or your father could have been the punisher, but your mother was the one who told him what to punish you about because you did such and so, and he says, well, come here, and then he swats you something. You know, it's all very physical. Sometimes it's emotional, too. Well, I guess you weren't a very good boy today. You did this, that, and you shouldn't have done that, and we're angry at you. And that gets back to, do they love me? Do they not love me? Have I done something so bad they no longer want to take care of me? What am I going to do if they don't take care of me? What do I do if they send me away? Now, the chances of being sent away if you're a natural child of the parents is kind of slim, but it does happen sometimes. But the thing is how do they feel about me when I've been so bad? You can see how children develop bad self-concepts. A self-concept is how you feel about yourself. That's the traditional definition. But it's also how do I feel other people feel about me? My self-concept is based not only upon what I feel about myself. My self-concept is based on how I feel other people feel about me. If they think I'm good, maybe I'm good. It's not so much what I feel about myself as what I think other people feel about me. It's kind of a combination of both. The person who gave you anxiety could have complained a lot about other things, maybe complained about their health because it's an attention-getting mechanism, or complaining so that they get control over something. Then it could be, too, that the parent wants the child to be continually dependent on them, and they don't want to help them to grow up to be an independent person, which, of course, at some point, they're going to have to be. So wanting to have the child be dependent, doing things for them all the time so they don't have to do it themselves. Why? Because if they're dependent upon me, then they have to stay with me. They have to let me control their lives. They have to let me take care of them. Then I become the one who's in control. I become the mother, and I don't let them grow up. I was in an office, a psychologist's office once, for a consultation on somebody I was working with, and a parent came up with a child, as a young child, who should have been able to have talked some. He was young, but he was able to talk, and he wouldn't talk. He gave signs. You know, if he wanted to eat, he'd point. If he wanted to use the bathroom, he'd point. They did everything for him. And they said, you know what? We're having trouble because this child can't talk, and he doesn't talk, and we don't understand it. Well, I understood it when I looked at the situation, and probably the psychologist that they were seeing, and that's what they were seeing the psychologist about, probably had kind of an inkling as to what it is, too. And I finally said, they discussed with me, and I was just another person waiting for a consultation. I wasn't there as a patient, but I wasn't there as a therapist either. And I finally said, do you do things for him so he doesn't have to talk? Can he point to water and you give him a drink? You don't ask him what he wants. You just do what he wants you to do through motions and signs. He doesn't have to talk because you're doing it for him. He's not going to do it if you're doing it for him. And all of a sudden, one of them said to the other, bingo. And the other one said, yes, we're doing exactly that. And I suspect they got the hint that I was giving them, that as long as they were in a sense forcing the child to be helpless, because they didn't want him to talk. They wanted him to be as he was so they could take care of him and have him dependent on them. I think that was the psychodynamic. But here again, I wasn't their psychologist. It wasn't my job to figure out the psychodynamic. So that was but that happened, so I wanted to bring that up to you. Sometimes these people are ugly. Their behavior and their facial expressions, and they're ugly. And you become afraid of them because they're ugly. So you do whatever they say, you leave them alone, you do your work as much as you can independently. And if you're a child, what do? You just don't talk. You don't verbalize. You keep away as much as you can. And if there is in a relationship, especially a parent-child relationship, never any touching or holding or caressing or gentleness in the house, then the child never learns that there is gentleness, there is loving, there is touching, there is holding. Most babies love to be held. Most babies love to be cuddled. It's a normal thing for contact, physical contact, gentle contact to happen in a home. If that does not happen, and some children are born without wanting contact, that's unusual, and then the baby's in trouble already. We are created as human beings to have contact and to be dependent to a certain degree and to have some kind of an intimate relationship where there's a sharing. And if a child does not have that, and that's not allowed to grow, then the child is in trouble. So if you are a person who has anxiety, and if you are a person who has a lot of depression, and the two switch back and forth, it could have been that you were raised by parents. And I'm just going to read this off because we're about out of time, but I'll just read this off, excuse me, not discuss about what I've just told you. Acting like they're perfect, acting like they feel that they have no faults, always on top of things, acting like they have to have control and getting control by making you feel guilty, giving double messages of love and hate, which is real critical, always blaming the child for whatever that goes wrong, and having very quick mood changes, going into rages, yelling and screaming, sarcastic, demeaning people, putting them down. Not that they made mistakes, but now they're worthless because they made a mistake. Using physical and verbal punishment, complaining about things and making the person responsible for whatever they're complaining about, and wanting people to be dependent on them, and being ugly in behavior and facial expressions, and not having normal contact. All of those things in a relationship between a parent and child would cause the child to grow up and be very anxious and very depressed. If it's a job situation, any of these things, that probably wouldn't be all of them, but any of these things in a relationship between bosses and the people that are working for them could cause them to be nervous and anxious about their job situation. What about teachers? And what about coaches? Things like this that they're acting on to the students or to the people that they're taking care of or helping to grow up in terms of teaching or coaching could cause them to be very anxious. There's all kinds of things that can go on in a relationship that's not healthy. And so as a result of that, anxiety comes. Now, we're about out of time, so I'm going to close it here, but what I'm going to go in next time is if you were subjected to any of these things, what would your reaction have been? And how would it have developed anxiety? What would your symptoms have been? What would your fears have been? And what would your behavior have been as a result of what I've discussed with you in this segment? And I think it may help you to pinpoint where your anxiety or where your depression came from, bearing in mind that there also, you can't forget the physical piece of this, that maybe there was something wrong in the way that the hormones were as you were growing up. You might have had physical problems adding to it. So it gets to be complicated, but I think we need to look at it, and I think it'll help you to pinpoint things. So I'm going to close it here, and we'll continue next time with this. Please join me then.